Throughout human history, we have done the best we could for ourselves in the face of being puzzled. So, for example, when sometimes we call out to God and feel our prayers are answered, and sometimes feel they are not, we are understandably puzzled, and we look to come up with an explanation for why and how this should be so. The explanations we come up with between us will be many and varied, and they will all contradict each other to some extent or other. When nobody can disprove our own preferred explanations, and enough other people agree to agree with them, we will feel reassured, and our faith in those explanations will grow. This is how it goes, while the truth remains unknown. When, over time, we become overly invested in our explanations, any challenges to them will be perceived of as a threat to be defended against. Whether our explanation be a theory of space-time or a theory of God, we will look to protect it because it has served us well. And all the while, the actual truth of the matter, whatever it may be, continues to unfold as it always has. It is my contention that all of human culture, all around the world, all of it throughout human history, no exceptions, is fundamentally and enthusiastically based in lies. When I say all of it, I really do mean all of it, which means that I am saying that your culture, whatever you may perceive it to be, whether it be spiritually based, scientifically based, personality based, or whatever, your culture is based in lies. You may think that for me to hold this view must mean that I am an enormously critical and judgmental man, but that's not where I'm coming from. I have full empathy for all of our cultures being based in lies. It is my contention that for living beings such as us, who have developed to such a level of complexity that we even have culture, it is not the discovery of the deepest and most complex truths of our existence that is our problem, but the identification of the deepest and simplest truths of our existence in particular, of existence in general. We humans are incredibly complex, and we think in complex ways. When we have not yet worked out the very simplest of things, we come up with complex solutions to not knowing the simplest things. Let me repeat that, because this is why I am not judgmental about us building our cultures on lies. When we have not yet worked out the very simplest of things, we come up with complex solutions for not knowing the simplest things. And where is the fault in that? Human lie culture all around the world is our complex solution to us not yet having identified the simplest truths of existence. The simplest truths that explain existence, the simplest truths that cause and regulate existence. This is my contention. This is the case that I am putting forward. This video is one of two. In the other, I focus on our complex solutions to not knowing the simplest truths that are mathematically and scientifically based explanations. In this video, my focus is on our complex solutions to not knowing the simplest truth that is a spiritually and religiously based explanation. In this video, I will explain why there is no such thing as God, and why it matters so very much. Let's get into it. In the other video, in which I disprove space-time, when I get to this part, I quote Wikipedia's definition of space-time. But I am not inclined to start things off here with the Wikipedia definition of God. This is for the simple reason that while scientists are able to come to some level of agreement with each other on what the word space-time means, this is far from the case when it comes to those who use the word God. I cannot disprove in this video all of the definitions of the word God because there are just too many. The video would get too long, and most of you would say that I got the definition wrong. So, it's actually easier for me to explain the existential truths that come before anything so complex as space-time or God could come into play. And then you can see how these truths relate to your definition of God. The first statement I'll make is one that no God believers will be able to disagree with. And this in itself is a thing that verges on the miraculous. It might be an interesting exercise for some of you to pause this video and see if you can predict what this statement can possibly be. Because how shall this heretical man make a statement that all God believers must agree with, when God believers do not agree with each other on what God is? I think this should be an interesting question for all of you, and I do encourage you to pause the video before I make the statement. Pause the video and ask yourself, what statement is this man going to make that he believes I must agree with if I am to say I believe in God? You can pause the video for as long as you like. I invite you to do so now and take as long as you need. Okay, so here it comes. My statement that you must believe if you do believe in God. There are truths that cannot not be true. There are truths that cannot not be true. As a God believer, do you agree with me that there are truths that cannot not be true? Because if you do not agree that this is true, then you are saying that it is possible that it is not true that there is a God. Because you are saying there are no truths that cannot not be true. This statement that there are truths that cannot not be true, it may seem a simple and innocuous enough thing to be said, but it is in fact entirely controversial. All of lie culture, spiritualistic, scientific, atheistic, agnostic, whatever, avoids the truth of this statement at all costs. A physicist will say that there are times when the laws of physics and even mathematics break down, and every God believer will experience a moment of doubt. To say that God just is, and that there are no truths that make it so, is only to say that you don't know what the truths are that make it so, that there is a God. If you are saying that there is a God, then you are, by necessity, saying that it is true that there is a God. If you maintain that there are no truths that make it so, that there is a God, you are effectively maintaining that there is no truth to there being a God. What I'm saying here is that whatever it is that you believe in, you must agree that there absolutely must be underlying truths that make it so. Otherwise, you are saying there is no underlying truth to what you are saying. So, dear God believer, which stance will you take in this discussion here? That there is underlying truth to your assertion that there is a God, or that there is none? The stance you take, the stance you absolutely must take, is that there is truth to what you say. Because if you do not say this, you are effectively saying you are wrong, that there is no truth to what you are saying. And what all of this means is that, God or no God, it is truth that comes first. Which means that even if there is a God, it is truth that is God's God. Truth that is the reason for and creator of God. And the only way to resolve this, if you do have an investment in the idea of God, is to understand truth as God. There are truths that cannot not be true. So, God is truth. Many God believers will be happy enough to agree with this statement. This brings us to the question of whether the truth that is God, the truth that causes God, is a truth that is knowable, understandable by us. Lie culture gives us a resounding no in answer to this question. We are told by religion, by theologians, by philosophers, and by scientists also, that the foundational, fundamental, primal, causal truths of existence cannot be known and understood by us. This is one of the greatest lies of lie culture. If complex truths develop from simpler truths, then God's mystery develops from God's simplicity. And if God is truth, then it is the very simplest, most absolute, most always in effect truths of God that are the reason for God. And we humans, we can know and understand the simplest truths. It is not that we cannot know them. It is not that we cannot understand them. It is only that when we try to reverse engineer our understanding of the simplest truths from the complex truths that we have become convinced of, we are trying to reverse engineer our understanding from complex truths that were never emergent from the simplest truths in the first place. Which means that those complex truths were never true all along. When we try to reverse engineer our understanding of the simple from the complex, all we are doing is trying to prove ourselves right. And when we fail, which every physicist and theologian that has ever tried has done, we then just say, yeah, it actually can't be done. The simplest truths are too simple to be known by the human mind. And then we need never prove the truth of our words. We need only speak with unshakable confidence, as so many God believers who disagree with each other do. We don't say, I tried and I failed. We say, it's impossible. It's impossible for everyone, not just me. But say that you are unable to work out the simplest truth, while you are capable of working out that this simplest truth that you have not been able to work out yet is too difficult for anybody to ever work out. That's not a good look. I wouldn't say that if I were you. But many theologians and theoretical physicists do say this, and somehow manage to not think of themselves as arrogant as they are saying it. There are truths that are so simple and so absolute that they are in effect in all places at all times, because they are so very, very simple and absolute that they are quite literally existentially incapable of not being true. Absolutely everywhere, always. They never could have not been true, and they never will not be true. How many of these truths are there? There are 4 of them. The more complex truths that are emergent from these 4 truths are only sometimes in effect. But these 4 truths that cannot not be true, they are always in effect, everywhere. And I will tell you these 4 truths now. Unless you'd like to pause the video and see if you can work them out yourself. That might be interesting for you. Perhaps just start with 1 to begin with. Let's just start with 1. can you think of a single truth that is true and in effect all the time, everywhere? I encourage you to pause the video now and try. Okay, so here it comes. Perhaps the simplest truth in all existence. There are 3 spatial dimensions. Our theoretical physicists believe that the 3 spatial dimensions didn't used to be here. Our theoretical physicists believe that once upon a time there was no such thing as height, length, or width, because there was nowhere for height, length, or width to happen. According to Wikipedia, their agreement on this is essentially universal. Essentially universal, meaning here that anybody who disagrees with this is discounted by default. Our theoretical physicists believe that the 3 spatial dimensions didn't used to be here, that they were brought into being, and that they possess physical properties such as shape and density. When a child tells a theoretical physicist that this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, the theoretical physicist will explain to the child that it's very complicated. It is too complicated for a child to understand. There is nothing at all remotely complicated about there being 3 spatial dimensions. There is nothing at all remotely complicated about why there can never be less than 3 spatial dimensions, or why there can never be more than 3 spatial dimensions. You couldn't have a God or anything else without there first being 3 spatial dimensions. You could not have a cause of the 3 spatial dimensions without first having 3 spatial dimensions. You could not have a cause of anything at all without there being 3 spatial dimensions there first. There are 3 spatial dimensions is a truth that cannot not be true, because it just cannot not be true. Okay, so let's take a look at truth number 2. Now you have my first truth. I invite you once again to pause the video and see if you can work out what my second truth, that is always in effect everywhere, is going to be. Pause the video now if you think you have a chance. Okay, so here it comes. My second truth that is always true, always in effect everywhere. 1 moment follows another. Just as one's passage through the spatial dimensions is an effect of a truth rather than a passage through a thing that is there, so too is one's passage through time an effect of a truth rather than a passage through a thing that is physically there. 1 moment follows another because one iteration of truth is emergent from the iteration of truth that preceded it, and so on. Time is an effect of the truth that when an event has happened, it has happened. Once an event has happened, it remains true forevermore that that event happened. Because there is no possible reason for it ever to inexplicably become untrue that that event happened. This is all that time is. One moment precedes another all the way back. One moment follows another all the way forward. It is a truth that cannot not be true and must, therefore, iterate. The experience of existence is the experience of the iteration of truths that cannot not be true and must, therefore, be experienced. The past is fixed because what has happened has happened. The future is up for grabs because it hasn't happened yet. Mysterious relativistic effects regarding space and time are mysterious relativistic effects that do not in any way change these truths that cannot not be true and which, therefore, cannot be changed. Anything that could conceivably be named as God could only be the result of truths that cannot not be true. And God is not supposed to be a result of anything other than himself, depending on which definition you use. Okay, so let's look now at the next truth. We have space because we cannot not have space. And we have time because we cannot not have time. Pause the video now if you'd like to take a shot at predicting my third truth that cannot not be true. Okay, so here we go. Both time and space can only be absolutely filled with relative subjective quality of some form or other. Did you get this one? Why must both time and space be absolutely filled with relative subjective quality of some form or other? It is because there is no such thing as nothing. If, at the beginning of this video, I had said that existence is a living unified field of truths in iteration, it would have sounded, to pretty much all of you, like so much technical mumbo-jumbo. But I have already presented 2 examples of truths that cannot not be true. Truths that apply to all locations in space at all times. So I have already established that just 2 simple truths can be responsible for the existence of infinite space for all time. And before this video, it was essentially universally agreed, according to Wikipedia at least, that our universe is finite. So when I say now that existence is a living unified field of truths in iteration, not only do I know what I'm talking about, but most probably you have a sense of what I'm talking about too. So, to help us make sense of truth number 3, let me make my statement in the confidence that you will not dismiss it out of hand as technical mumbo-jumbo. Existence is a living unified field of truths that cannot not be true in iteration. And all iteration of truth that occurs within space and over time occurs relative to all the iteration of truth that occurs elsewhere in space and time. There can be no such thing as nothing anywhere, because truths that cannot not be true anywhere must be holding true absolutely everywhere. There can be no pockets in time and space in which truth is not in relative iteration. So, all and any qualities to be found in all and any locations at all and any times can only be subjective, relative to each other. If you took a single given quality present in a single given location at a single given moment in time, completely isolated from all other qualities, it would be entirely meaningless. It is only the relativity that space and time provide that allows for meaning to exist at all. So truth number 3 gives us meaning, but it is always relative meaning. We are all subject to the same truths, but our experience of those truths is always subjective to us. And now we arrive at our 4th truth. Our first 3 truths have provided us an environment within which subjective experience takes place. What is it, do you think, that the 4th truth will provide us? Pause the video now if you'd like some time to think about it. Okay, here's the 4th truth that is always in effect everywhere. Truths iterating relative to truths is mechanistically synonymous with consciousness. Nobody has ever explained consciousness until this. A pine cone falling from a tree and causing an imprint in the ground where it lands is mechanistically synonymous with that pine cone being conscious of the ground and the ground being conscious of the pine cone. Each was affected by the presence and behaviour of the other. The iterating of the truth of the pine cone falling had no choice but to take into account the iterating of the truth of the ground it fell onto, and vice versa. The iteration of truth relative to truth is truth being conscious of truth. And it has no choice but to be conscious, because the truth is incapable of stopping itself from being true, incapable of stopping any other truth from being true. And so, truth must take itself into account at all levels. The falling pine cone cannot ignore the fact that the ground is in its way. If the truths of existence cannot be broken, then they cannot break each other, which means they must accommodate each other, which is synonymous with them being aware of each other. The truths of existence are in a perpetual state of balancing and rebalancing relative to each other, because they just cannot not be. And this is what consciousness is. The living unified field is living because it is truth that cannot stop iterating. And it is conscious because it is truth that cannot not take the truth of itself and all the rest of itself into account. This is what consciousness is. When you look at the world around you, you are literally looking at consciousness, the consciousness of the field. If you think that human consciousness and animal consciousness is the only consciousness that qualifies as consciousness, you are wrong. All is consciousness. The underlying truth of it is simple, and the end result of it is complex and mysterious. Welcome to existence. The underlying truths of existence are simple, and the lived experience of the whole affair is infinitely complex, which makes it mysterious in all manner of ways. And so, we have scientists who believe the spatial dimensions can be curved, and God believers who believe that they cannot understand, are not capable of understanding that which they are compelled to believe on pain of punishment. This is the law of religion, that you cannot claim to understand that which you are required to believe. It is much the same in the world of theoretical physics. So, these four truths I have presented here, these four truths that are true and in effect at all times, in all places. It's not that I'm going to say that they cannot be argued against, because I know a scientist or a God believer can argue that anything is anything. I present these four truths for those who are lucid enough to recognize actual truth when they do finally hear it. There are three spatial dimensions, because it cannot be otherwise. One moment follows another, because it just cannot be otherwise. All activity in space and over time is relatively experienced, relatively defined, because it cannot be otherwise. And all of that activity is consciousness, because it cannot be otherwise. if you still wish to call all of this God, then of course you can do so. But to call truth God is to diminish the importance of truth in the face of a word that was invented when the truth was not known. And diminishing the importance of truth is what lie culture does. And this is what both science and God-believing does. It tells us truth is too mysterious for us to know, so let's make something up and see who can speak it with the most unshakable confidence. Who can tell the biggest lie and sound most convincing? And if you are still happy in that, well, that's just another lie.